Yeah, well, and he only cares, like, it's the idea is he never bothers with her. He never really cares until she goes away. And then he's like, oh, wait, no, I do want you.
And then,
nice.
And that's where, that's where that title,
sorry.
And that's
that's someone on the phone. They heard that idea. They're like, love it. Now I'm suing you. No. To really start off the conversation, it's been a year. How have you guys been? What have you guys been up to? And like, did you miss me?
I think we missed this. I mean, we missed seeing your face. It was I don't know. I love our interactions just because like it's so entertaining when we get a message from you on Instagram, and my hope is that it's always a voice message, which it always is. And then there's like a combination of like and excitement and fear of what's about to happen, especially when there's like 7 of them in a row. I'm like, oh, he had a good Saturday night. He had a really good Saturday night. This should be fun.
You just drunk dial us.
I feel like people would assume instantly when you say that. It's like, yeah, it's like it's a Friday night, it's a Saturday night. He's definitely just going through his Instagram and he's like, he has to remain professional. He has a podcast. But it's like but if you listen to it, you're like, oh my God. It's like he was wasted. I'm like, nope, just sitting in my room. And they're like, can you at least, it's like if you had a PR person, can you at least spin that you got drunk? And then we can make it look like it wasn't so bad. I'm like, nope, it's just me. So they're like, so you weren't on anything? Like, no drama. I'm like, no. They're like, can you work with us here? We want to give you a reason why you are weird. I'm like, I am weird and I like it. But yeah, I think it's interesting because I like doing the voice message things for people because tone in text is hard to tell. And like when you get 20, like not that I would, but if you get like 20 odd texts from people, you're like, what's up? Nothing, you? Same. Conversation's over. And then you're like, wow, that really went places. And then they'll like three weeks from that, they'll be like, man, we don't talk a lot. I'm like, right here. This is why. Hey. Nothing much, you. Hey, I'm going to a wedding. Cool. And it just keeps going. I'm like, these are 1-word answers. At least in voice message, you're like, listen to it. Enjoy it. If you
Plus, I mean, you can't do like voices and impressions.
Yeah, I think that's the thing we look forward to the most. I'm like, all right, what's the voices coming in? And like, I feel like at times we like send requests.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, we're like, yep, okay, nailed that one too.
Yeah. I feel like I've tried to master a few more, but dealing with like COVID earlier in the year, I was like, oh man, I really had the Monsters Inc. voice down pat. And then I was like, you know what? Let's see if I can keep it without COVID. And then it's just like, Sully. And I was just still like, I don't even know who the character is. But one of my friends is like, did you interview that person? I'm like, that's me. But yeah, I think it's interesting to do voice messages. I like that sometimes when you send ones back, it's like 2:00 my time in the morning, and I'm like, good, something to listen to, and then like prepare to respond to the next morning. But like, I want to ask you, of course, now we kind of went into this before the interview, but or the conversation, like, you know, all the acts now that we've had on and all the acts that you've seen, like, you know, tell me a little bit about that whole growth and prospect, because a year from now when we had you on, like, what about we have you a year from now on again? Like, do you think that there'll be more acts that you'll know, but like, I didn't know that Paige was involved in this. I didn't know that Robin Olini was involved in this. Like, have you met acts that you're kind of surprised that you're like, I did not know that you did this the same way that we did. Like, I didn't know you were in the same field.
I think a really good way to kind of describe it, and I think it's extremely humbling, and at the same time, it's also at the CCMAs in London. I think that's maybe like the best way to kind of put it. So at the CCMAs in London, you know, we had a lot of people. They don't know us by name. No one knows like Armand and Nicole, and that's fine. And it was very overwhelming because we had people that we didn't know and be like, "Hey, Broadtree," and we're like, "What? Did you know who that was?" No, okay. So, but I think, you know, this community is amazing in the sense of just how embracing and welcoming like everybody is. You know, we didn't know Paige, for example, like Paige Rutledge. We didn't know her. We knew her via like a few DMs on Instagram and a couple of comments, but when we met everybody at the CCMAs, it's like, we've known them for years.
Yeah.
So I think that's been one of the coolest parts about, even though, we weren't able to necessarily meet anybody up until that moment. It was just, I don't know. It was an interesting time from going from, like you said, to having these people on your show, and not necessarily, I guess, realizing that, we were in kind of that same community too, if that makes sense. Like, we were in that same pool and seeing at that, because I don't know, like a year ago when we were doing this, I'm like, we're the little like babies that have no idea what we're doing. And like when we play one of these shows, like the first, I think, online like songwriters round that we did with Dave Woods, we were just like, look at the people that we're playing with. Like we looked up all of them. We're like, holy crap, this guy's written like a Juno song. We're like, wow, why are we here?
And the first one we did live too. Oh my God.
So it's been humbling to kind of been, I think, I think we were intimidated the first time we did it. And now, there's always still like that nervousness, but that nervousness is more like, crap, we have to play a show. Like we're about to go on stage in front of people and play. And it's no longer the nervousness of
imposter syndrome.
My God. Yeah. Like that imposter syndrome's kind of gone. Yeah. That's a really good word for it. So, but yeah.
I want to ask you though, of course, now you have, well, I mean, I can always post edit this anyway, but you have like a new song out at this point. Tell me a little bit about the song. I've seen clips or snippets of the video on Instagram. I've seen like the lyrical video. I have teased you about the lyrical video in terms of like, I like the Keith Urban references. I like how country music now kind of, there are certain artists even with country music that's like, yeah, I put on that Garth Brooks song. I'm like, yeah, you did. And I know that Garth Brooks song. So I feel old, but I still understand it. But then when you reference Keith Urban, I'm like, yes, that's a great way to start a song. But my very first thing I'm going to bring up to you, Nicole, because I feel like this is Nicole's doing, is so you're upset that he's out drinking with his buddies, but you're basically saying it's okay for you to drink red. Come on. Why are you mad if he's out drinking with his buddies and you're out drinking red? I feel like that's a double standard there, Nicole.
So I think this comes from the timeline. So the song is all told in retrospect. So tonight she is at home chilling with her red wine because she's finally kicked this guy to the curb and she's like celebrating personally at home. When she talks about him being out with his buddies, that is in the past. This is the relationship she had before where he was out every night causing trouble, being raucous. Is that a raucous? Is that an adjective?
Yes.
Causing trouble, getting himself arrested, beating up strangers. So she's at home.
Well, where are those lyrics? Is that in like the uncensored version? Because all I heard was he was out drinking with his buddies. I want the uncensored version where it's like, and he was beating up hookers, and I'd be like, okay. I'd be like, definitely dump that guy.
That was our original, and then we went back and rewrote it because we're like,
yeah, that's fair.
Radio, yeah.
You got to look at what country radio is going to play.
There will be a sequel single called "You're Beating Up Hookers."
Yeah, I feel like. Listen, you talked to Dean Brody. Dean Brody had some good songs. I'm. It's funny because we had him on like 3 or 4 years ago, and I was even shocked. I'm like, you're a country music artist, and you're telling me that country radio wouldn't play Dean Brody? And he's like, yeah, there were just certain lyrics they didn't like. I'm like, what did you do? Did you go like Eminem verse in a Dean Brody song? Like, what happened there, Dean? He's like, oh man, just certain topics. I was like, all right, fair enough. But sometimes I listen to country radio and I'm like, whoa, that is not the country music I listened to or grew up on. Yeah. I grew up on listening to beers, trucks, and women. And now it's almost like, yeah, well, they're all intact, but how about my job? I'm like, your job is a country singer. What are you sad about? Or there's just like nice songs out there. Like I think, a shout out to, I think it's like Steve Olson. I think that's, Nashville to Nothing or Nashville or Nothing, something of that nature.
Yeah.
I like that song, but it's just generally, hey, I had a dream to go to Nashville. I'm like, it's awesome. Love it. No song, nothing about women, nothing about beer, nothing about, and I'm like, that's cool. And then the next minute on the radio, it'll be like, Tim McGraw, Truck Yeah. I'd be like, can I win? Can I win, please? Can you just have like, I would love it if a country music station had to do one day where they couldn't find a song about women, beer, or trucks, and then they'll be like, we can't, we're out of, we can't.
So we actually have this thing called we have a country cliche list that we keep with us in the car, and it's a list of it. So it's because we write, country songs. It's a list of things that are cliche in country songs.
So we have 3
and
columns.
They're columned. And the one is, this is okay sometimes to sing. No, this is okay. This is a cliche that is okay to sing about. Like mama, you're allowed to sing about your mother. That's fine. Yep. So that's a column that we're allowed to have.
The yes
column. Second column is things that are okay sometimes, like dirt roads. You can talk about that sometimes, but not too often, or that's way too much. And then we have the column about things you are never allowed. We're never allowed to write about in our songs because they're just so painfully cliche that Nicole will not be able to handle it. So we have a couple of things in that. What are some things in that column?
I don't know. It's your column. You every time you hear something, you're like, this is going in the column.
There's a few things that I'm just like, no, I refuse. We cannot have it. It's cliche. It's overused. I hate it.
That's fair, because when you bring up dirt roads, it wasn't my go-to, but as soon as you said it, instant red flag came up where there's a song, I think it's like Brooks and Dunn, Red Dirt Road. Yeah. And then there's Adam Gregory, which is like Dirt Road Therapy. Right. So that was just 2 instantly off the top of my head. So like,
I just find so many songs. Maybe we listen to a lot of obviously Canadian country, but so many of the songs are just about nothing lately. Like because back, in the early 2000s, I found songs usually had a story to them.
Yeah.
For the most part, which is what we kind of try to do. But now so many songs are literally just about like driving down the country road, my girl in her short jeans, blah, blah, blah. It's sunny and warm out, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're not saying anything.
Yeah.
And it gets them, like some of them, if the song is really good and it's a jam and it's a bop, they can get away with it. That's fine. Like Cruise, Florida Georgia Line. It's a great song.
I was going to suggest like Cruise definitely fits that build, but it's just good.
People are just doing these songs that are not about anything, and they all are the same. And I'm like, no, I refuse. That's not cool.
That's going to be your next song. I refuse.
Yeah. Well, we were thinking of writing a song about country cliches. Brad Paisley has one that's like how to write. It's like Country Song 101 or something like that, and it mentions like the American soldiers. You got to talk about our troops, and you got to talk about Jesus and church on Sunday and all these things. It's so funny.
Marianne is trenched in one called, I think, Pop 101.
That you know what the sad part is for me with that song is when we had Ian Castleman on this show at one point, I was like, he's like, yeah, there were people like super offended, and they're like, oh, look, Mariana's Trench changed her song. I was like, that was me. I was one of those people. And then he's like, why? And I was like, I just thought you were going into pop music. And he was like, no. He was like, we were making fun of pop music. I was like, well, technically, you kind of are pop music.
Like you described most of your songs, right?
Yeah, but I mean, in fairness, I think he took it with stride. But I get what he was going for. But like, that song is really catchy. I feel like like there's parts of like when they bring in like the harmonies of things, and then they talk about Mumford and Son. And I'm like, dude, you played that so well. I understood the Black Eyed Peas reference, and I was like, I understand this song so well, but I like it. And then I'm like, I don't know if you were trying to make fun of that or if you wanted me to actually like it. You were playing really a mental mindfuck on me because I downloaded anyway. So
yeah. And well, that's the thing I love. Like the entire time that I was listening to it, I'm like, I want to hate this because it's literally just describing what is wrong with music right now. But it's really good.
I want to ask you, going back to like your song there, like just tell me a little bit about the whole process of it and like how you kind of came up with the idea. Because I know, like, listen, when we're talking about cliches with like music and stuff, like, yeah, there are always breakup songs. Like, I feel like I'm really dying at one point to have Taylor Swift on this podcast just to kind of rip her a new one, but also tell her, like, listen, I grew to appreciate you, Taylor, but there was a point in time where I'm like, can you please just find a healthy relationship and write about that? Like, just please, for one time. That's why no one wants to date you, because they're like, if I break this girl's heart, I'm going on a number 1 top 10 list for the rest of time. So
there was a point where that was my plan. I'm like, listen, I would want to date her for a week, break her heart, and be immortalized.
Yeah. See, that's wrong. That is wrong on it. Don't do that. Don't do that.
No, but it's, when we finished, like right after the album came out, and again, this is, I think coming from like two people who really didn't know what we were doing when we first started. We finished the album, and in our head, and it was COVID, so it's not like we had this world of, oh, now we go live and just start to promote it.
Yeah.
We went, okay, we should keep writing, and like we kept going, and then after 3 weeks, I was like, we should probably stop. Like we have 7 songs. We're going to release another album in 3 months, and that's probably not okay. So we started to tuck a lot of those songs away, and then right before our album release party, which was a virtual show, wonderful, so much fun. The guitarist that was playing with us that night, he heard that song. We weren't playing it, but he heard it, and he's like, there's something about that song. We're like, okay. And then we heard multiple people saying the same thing. It just literally heard the early demo.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound nearly as big as the final product did, but if people just kept saying like, there's something about that. We're like, all right, well, we played it all tour when we finally got to tour in the fall. And it's the only song we didn't tuck away after, like with all the other songs that we had written after the album. And, yeah, it literally, like, I think it's the only song that I think, when we were playing bar gigs and pub gigs, you're doing a bunch of covers, but this was the one song that when people heard, people went, oh, this is good. So we kind of we took that and we're like, all right, well, we'll roll with it. And I think we're like, okay, well, the challenge was we didn't get to release it last summer because we knew it was going to be a summer release.
Yeah.
And then, our post-COVID song came out. We're like, okay, well, Christmas is around, so we're not going to release during Christmas. We didn't want to release it in January, so we released something else. And then we're like, okay, this is the year. This is the summer. We're releasing this damn song because we've been sitting on it for a year. Yeah. And it was great. I mean, like we plotted it out. We knew the date that we wanted to. We knew that we wanted to make it bigger than it was. So we brought in just some incredible music. This was the first time that ever, like in our entire time of producing music and doing things together, that we actually brought other people in. We brought in more guitarists. We brought in like a pedal steel player. We brought in a banjo player and a bassist. We brought in Sean Andrews, who is the sound engineer for Glass Tiger. He's an old friend of mine. So I'm like, can you mix and master the track? He's like, absolutely. So we were other than basically writing the song and kind of getting the very baseline demo done in Logic, we didn't have to do much for this one, which was it was actually kind of cool to have the basic song written, have other people contribute to it. So and when we finally heard the final mix, we're like, damn, Jesus, like that's not what we expected it to sound like, but it was in a really, really good way. But that was, I think, the process of like the recording of it, or at least kind of the lifespan of kind of getting it from where it was started to where it ended. But as far as writing the song, that was fun because we knew we were like, there was a point where we kind of said like, we haven't really written a true, like a proper like country song. Like we've treaded that line. We had like, everybody's kind of said, so, yeah, you're on this like weird thing of like musical theater and country. We're like, well,
yeah,
hence the name. Yeah, we know that. That's kind of our thing. But we wanted to write like a good, like just a good old fashioned like pop country song. And
the seed of the idea came from you for this one. And then going back to the fact that we're, musical theater people, to sort of explain to me what he had envisioned this song to be, he's like, the musical Waitress? What's the main character? Jenna. So the main character in the musical Waitress, her name's Jenna, and basic premise of Waitress is she has a shitty life with a shitty boyfriend who's just a dirtbag, and she kind of starts having an affair with somebody, and then she gets pregnant, but obviously the guy that she's with thinks it's his, and it's a whole thing. Yeah. Anyways, so he's like, it's Jenna and Earl, who's her shitbag husband, right?
Yeah, like imagine their relationship.
And as soon as he said that, imagine their relationship if she'd walked away, right?
Okay.
As soon as he said that, I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is.
And I think we both went away, and I'm like, okay, so that's the concept. You go do your thing. I'm gonna do mine. We'll like write out what you come up with, and we'll come back together.
Yeah.
And the first verse that like it's Friday night, like that whole like concept of like it's Friday night, that to me was my chorus. So I'm like, this is the chorus, like it's Friday night and like you're fucking out of here. That's
yeah.
And then she came out, and then I think she just said, she's like, I mean, the only reason this guy keeps coming back is because, you know, she lets him.
Yeah, well, and he only cares, like, it's the idea is he never bothers with her. He never really cares until she goes away, and then he's like, oh wait, no, I do want you.
And then
Nice.
And that's where, you know, that's where that title.
Sorry.
And that's
that's someone on the phone. They heard that idea. They're like, love it. Now I'm suing you. No.
and that's literally where that line came from. Like, you only miss me because I'm gone. I'm like, all right, that's the chorus.
I feel like, you know what, like, not to cut you off there, but like in terms of just the kind of the growth and relatability there, like, you know, when you were saying like even in the early stages, people were coming up to you and saying like this one kind of sticks. I think it's due to the relatability where there's people out there that have either been in that spot, have a friend in that spot, or they were that spot. You know, like they were the shit bag, and then they're like, you know what, I'm old enough to realize I was. And the song kind of hurts me, but like I get what you're going for. So I mean, I hope like there's not a lot of people that are like, yeah, I was like 20 odd people coming. This song relates to me. It's like, oh, you were the one that got like you left. No, I was the shitbag. I'd be like, I'm like, all right, like fair.
You know, here's my thing. If there's a bunch of men that come in and be like, I was the shitbag, I'm like, I'm glad you're acknowledging that. Good for you.
Yeah, better than like this song hits me hard, but I don't understand why. Be like, are you the shitbag? No, I'm not the shitbag. Be like, are you sure? I'm not completely sure. Yeah, but I think it's the relatability to it. But at the same point, it's like I like how you're kind of like saying about the growth of bringing in people, because I was actually going to mention it, but I was like, I don't know how they take it, because I don't want to come across as like, you know, some people want to be labeled certain ways. Some people try to get out of their label. But like to me, when I heard Broadtree, and we made the joke last time of like it's Broadway meets country, and I was like, that makes sense. But then this one seemed a little bit more like overly country, but I don't mean it in a negative way. I was like, oh, it's like they kind of have something here with this country song in terms of like they're just sticking right to the middle of this is country. We're not going to overdo it. We know what it is. It's almost like it's like sometimes you'll interview bands and they're like, yeah, we're trying to cross things over. Like we're going to have like pop and screamo. I'm like, what are you going to call that? It's like, we just call it like scop. And I'd be like, that's not even a thing. And they'd be like, it's going to be a thing. I'm like, it's not a thing. Stop. And then like later on, they're like, yeah, we should have just stuck with pop. I'm like, exactly. Like I feel bad for like I think it's like the band Perry. Like I love the band Perry, but there's times where I'll look up on Google and I'll be like, that is not the band Perry that I grew up with. I'm like, what happened? And I'm like, fair for you to try to go out and experiment, but I'm like, what was wrong with what you were doing?
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Well, and that's the thing. I think we knew we wanted to write kind of like a song that bridged more on the countryside, but we still wanted to make sure that we were still keeping ourselves in there.
Yeah.
And like that's why we don't have as many cliches, and we still have like the two characters in there. Like having that male voice that comes in over top of hers, like that was the keeping the little piece of like the Broadway in there while we could. Actually, a lot of people. Like we did video reactions for that part, and just the amount of people that just burst out laughing when you had the male voice come in and do this.
Yeah.
Just I'm like, that's so smart. Like why? Like I'm like, yeah, well, it works, so we'll take it.
There's certain parts when I look at like the snippet of videos where it's like, I'm like, I get it, Nicole. This is like your kind of thing. It's like you whatever, but there's like Nicole, like kind of like even in your Instagram clip where Nicole, like you can hear the voiceover and the singing, and Nicole kind of like stares at you with like the eye. Like I'm like, all right, relax, settle down, and then you just hear like the background vocal, and then it's like you see you strumming the guitar, and then I'm just like, what is this now? It's like, come on, give him a few lines here and there. I want to hear his voice too. Come on. Someone just be like, I love this Nicole band. I'd be like, no, it's not just Nicole. There's two of them. And then someone's just like, well, I see him, but I don't hear him. I'm like, listen harder.
Well, you know what? I think it's actually interesting because this was a conversation that we had at one point. It's fun to bring it up because we were talking about, you know, songs and singles and, you know, the ones that are like if like the existing songs that we had and the stuff that we're writing, and you know, when we're aiming, like now the point is when we start writing a song, we're like, okay, so we wrote the basics of it. Is this an album track? Is it going to be something like a B-side, or are we aiming for radio? Because then if we're aiming for radio, we have to trim things up.
Yeah.
And we had this conversation about the fact that realistically, if most of the songs, if any, that are going to make it to radio from our end are likely going to be something that has one singer in it. And it's likely going to be Nicole, because let's face it, she's got the better voice. So, and we had that conversation. Like, realistically, if there is a song that's going to hit as a single, it's going to be one that you're going to do as the vocal, because people just tend to identify with that. And if you listen to, like, even Lady Antebellum's first song, it wasn't until like late in the second verse that I forget his name. I know Hillary, I don't remember his name, but like he doesn't relate into that, and that's because you're already hooked in. Yeah. But if you have two voices going back and forth right off the bat, it's just not something that's easily sellable. Like, I think it's something unique, but
yeah,
like Little Big Town's a really good example of that. Our publicist, like the reason he signed on with us, he's like, your last single was the closest thing to Little Big Town that I heard, and I love Little Big Town, so I'm on, like, I want you guys. We're like,
nice,
great, awesome. You're the huge name in Canadian. It was Eric Alper that reached out to us. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah,
I know Eric.
Yeah, like you hear the name and everybody goes, yeah, I know who Eric Alper is. So as soon as we got that, and he said,
well, I'll take him down a peg. I know who he is, but never like no.
But it was really interesting. I'm like, okay, well, we started to listen a lot more of Little Big Town, because we're like, okay, well, let's see what it is, and it is very much like there's 4 singers in that band, but there is never a point where you have 2 of them singing the same song.
Oh, really? Okay. I've never noticed that.
It's always one of them. Like, they'll all be singing the harmonies. They'll all be singing to make a nice chorus, but there's always one lead. And they're like, you'll have one of the male leads. And I don't know, if you don't have a photo of them, you never really know who's singing what, but I found that really
true.
And when we went to go see them live, that was the thing that I looked at. I'm like, the brunette, she does most of the singing. And then the younger guitarist does the other, like, if there's a male half, he usually tends to do most of them. The other 2 are, there for backup. But that was something that I found really, really unique, is that marketability now, it's very rare to find, unless it's a band A featuring this, or like lead singer, like, Halsey featuring this artist. Yeah. It's very hard to actually say, like, here's a band, or here's an artist where there's 2 people involved.
Love Halsey, by the way. So that's a good example. I like it though, like you were mentioning, because when I think about, like, so when you mentioned about Little Big Town, the one that comes to mind, and again, someone might correct me and be like, no, you're wrong, but like, I think the chicks, I always think like the small one is like always like the more powerful one. The other 2 kind of do sing, but I don't know if they've ever had like their own necessary verse, right? And then the other one I kind of think of when you mentioned that was in terms of, I guess it's somewhat like relatable, like Rascal Flatts. Like, I know you got the one that has like, oh my God, like just the voice. The other 2 are like just good harmony, and there's nothing wrong with that. I was distracted by the dog there, just kind of stretched out there. I was like, he's like, yeah, I love it. Love hearing you talk. But yeah, like I never really noticed that until you kind of brought it up, because there are certain, like, I guess, acts out there or musicians, and like you listen to them, you're like, love how they all come together. Like, like for me, Backstreet Boys, like, I mean, yeah, they all have their own voice. You grow to appreciate it over time. But like in the Canadian example, like the Hunter brothers, they have really good harmonies, but I'm sure individually they have their own lines. But at the same time, like, man, I won't know the difference. Like, you show me a picture of Ty Hunter compared to like someone else, I'm like, I don't know which one of you is singing what part, but y'all sound the same. Great.
Well, and I think you kind of nailed it, right? Because if you're let's just say that you didn't know the Hunter brothers, you didn't know, and you just heard that song on the radio. If you can't really tell the fact that there's 2 singers in there, then you just kind of get hooked on it anyway. And then you go, oh, wait, there's 2 of them. Cool. Like, you find out after the fact. And I find that so interesting. Like, when I heard Little Big Town, I didn't realize there were 4 people in that band. And when I saw, I'm like, oh, I thought there were 3, but then that was like, the whole Lady A thing. But yeah, that was something that, like, we had that conversation at one point. I'm like, I do think that, like, if we're aiming for radio, it's going to be a one, like one of us in there doing the harmonies and things like that, but the other person's going to be the one that's leading the vocals on it. So it's
as long as like you don't split up or like go different ways, like the Sugarland experience. Like, listen, yeah. I love Sugarland's like first song, but then like now when I go back, I kind of feel bad because I'm like she is still there. She is a part of this band, and then all of a sudden she's not. And then it's almost like, all right, they kept on going on without you. It's like, okay.
I didn't know that. I love Sugarland. Oh, that makes me sad.
Well, it's like I think it's like what Jennifer Nettles and then the other guy. I mean, it's bad that I can't remember the guy's name, but it's like literally that's what people remember. Jennifer Nettles, because she's the one that's going out doing publicity. She's on shows. The other guy, and maybe that's just him. He just doesn't want to do, and that's fine. That's cool. But like sometimes I'll look back at people and I'm like, oh man, like even Little Mix. Like I like Little Mix. There used to be 4 of them, and then one of them was like, yeah, no, I'm going off solo. I'm like, I want to support you, but you haven't really done anything for me to kind of like reach out and say, great. Like at least when One Direction split up, you're like, all right, it's always been the debate of whose band is it really, but then they all go their own separate ways. And you're like, all right, you're all goddamn talented.
Did we have this conversation last night about Backstreet Boys and NSYNC?
Yeah, we were talking about Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and like what was the difference and why one was more successful. And I was like, so when I was growing up, and even to this day, I still remember each individual Backstreet Boy. You know what I mean? Like they all had their own like persona and that sort of thing. And like NSYNC tried to do that, but really it was like Justin Timberlake and the others. You know?
I want to ask you in terms of, I know we went kind of over a few things that you'd miss in general, but like, you know, when people listen to the song, the idea is basically like, hey, you only miss me when I'm gone. You're a piece of trash. Trailer trash. But like, I want to ask you, like, in your own relationships, what kind of things are you glad that like you either walked away from or you're happy that's like, yeah, I don't miss that at all? Because I feel like that's the kind of thing that people would walk away with this song going like, yeah, you know what? Don't miss that at all. Because I feel like, listen, I don't have a lot of relationships. That's just me. Something that I try to struggle with of why. No, but it's like, I will sometimes look at my friends and be like, yeah, like we're arguing over this tonight. And I'm like, you're literally arguing over what movie? Yeah, she wants to watch Disney. I want to watch. I'm like, how about you fucking compromise? What, week 1, watch Disney. Week 2, watch this. Like, you know, and it's like when they get out of the relationships, they're like, don't miss that at all. And then 3 weeks later, like, I miss watching movies. I'm like, it's your own fault. You didn't have a strong enough relationship. So what kind of things don't you miss, I guess, about like in your own mind of, you're like, if you had relationships, you're like, you know what? I don't miss that. I'm kind of glad that relationship's over because.
I have more serious answers. If you have more
yours. I don't have a ton of relationships either. I have not had a lot of relationships.
They're all intimidated because you're sweet ass Broadtree references. They're like, it's Broadway and it's country. They're like, I just want to date Nicole, and then they're like, but I have this idea.
Oh man. Like, okay, so here's some that I don't like, the things that have kind of gotten better that I don't miss. The not believing me about directions, like getting really freaked out about like going the wrong way and not knowing where we're going, and I'm really good at directions. Yeah. And like not believing me and like taking my phone away and being like, let me see the map. And I'm like, I know where we're going. Like, stop being an ass, you know? So there's that. I also think maybe this is a girl thing, and I'm sure other people have different opinions, so I might be in the minority here, but like, I think overwatching porn, not cool. If you have a real actual girl in front of you who is willing to sleep with you, should that not be more exciting than a screen? I don't know, with strangers and another guy. Why are you watching another guy do things? I don't know. That's just my opinion.
What if he wants to watch porn with you?
That's different though. Like that's okay.
That's you know what? Now that sounds weird to me. Imagine your girlfriend being like, "Hey, are you watching porn?" You're like, "Yeah." It's like, "Can I watch too?" I'm like, "What's wrong with you?"
Do that.
Well, there's that like I think Key and Peele did a sketch on it where it's like, yeah, maybe we'll watch it together. It's like, okay. And then the girl goes to the guy. It's like, you pick. And you just see him going like, shit. Yeah.
I think that's sensible, but I agree with like Nicole. I agree with Nicole in the sense of like the whole directions thing. I was looking at Armand that time and it was like, literally, he was just like, oh God, like retracing in his mind, how many times have I taken her phone and was like, oh.
No, usually if we're going somewhere, you're driving and I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I sleep a lot. I sleep like 13 hours a day. It's really bad.
It's really great when we're touring where I'm like, we've got a 3-hour drive ahead of us.
He knows I'm gonna call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The company's great. You know, it's funny because I like when I look at that song and I kind of look at both sides to it. Obviously, you know, Scumbag X, but I think, and not to get like too serious here, you know, I think for me, I don't know, I always looked at a lot of relationships and I kind of blamed them on like my mental health, you know, like I'm
Yeah,
I have
okay.
this illness and it causes me to be this way, and if you can't handle it, it's your fault.
Yeah.
But there's only like, I think it was only until very, very recently when I don't know, I think like 3 years ago, I kind of swore off relationships. I'm like, I'm done. Like I'm sick and tired of like having to like deal with this over and over. And then there did come a point where I'm like, okay, maybe there's something that I need to do to fix this, because obviously like it can't be everyone's fault all the time. And it was a really big eye opener, because I think like, you know, that whole, like, I think the we're using the only miss because I'm gone idea, you know, that's the thing that happened in every relationship. And then it got to the point where I'm like, okay, I need to figure out like for sure how much of this is like everybody else. And
Yeah.
I think when I finally ended up finding like there's this amazing therapy that's designed for people that are borderline. And I finally went through that therapy where I actually walked away going, wow, I like would probably be still like, I'd be with my first girlfriend, like had I had these skills, you know? So it's definitely, you know, I like to an extent I can fault, and, you know, I can take, but you know, you take own learnings out of it. And sometimes it takes a few relationships for like, you know, I think I might be the problem. But you know, I think a lot of it is also like being the opposite of the guy in this song, where you're just sit there and go like, okay, you know what, if I'm clearly fucking up every single time and she's dumping me, maybe I should smarten up so that this doesn't happen again. So I think you know, what I don't miss is just like, you know, hitting like just shit hitting the fan, because usually, and, you know, like I don't necessarily think it's with everyone. I like, there most of the times things have ended relatively amicably. There's been some relationships that have just been like, and you've heard stories. There are some that are just like, I've told the story to a few people and everyone's response was the exact same. Like, who the hell is this bitch? Like, what is she? But yeah, I mean, I think those are the things that I don't necessarily miss. I think having to, there's some that have been great. There's some that were like, you're kind of expected to do everything.
Yeah.
Like, you're the one that's responsible for like, and there's points where it's great. You're like, oh, I get to pick the movie again. Oh, great. Yeah. But then it's also your fault for picking a movie that they didn't want to watch. You grow, right? I think that's something like where I look at now, like, I don't know, maybe all hope isn't lost, but at the same time, like, you know, it also puts you in a very scary position, right? Like, I think as like, and I mean, like, we can talk about it, because like, you know, coming out of like the tour and like getting into Christmas was stressful. Like, you know, I think we were both stressed out. Like, there was so much going on, and again, I think neither of us had really prepared or were ready for last year. Like, I don't think either of us were ready for the album, for anyone to listen to the album other than like our families. I don't think we weren't ready for people to actually be interested in talking to us about music, or in this case about literally anything, you know, and for people to follow. Like, it got to the point where like we went from this being a really fun project to this being a project where we have to work to keep it up. And I think we almost lost a little bit of a sight, and we lost sight of why we did this in the first place. Like, we lost sight of like, we're doing this for fun. Like, we should be having fun. And there was a point in December where I think like we both kind of reached a peak of like, you know, this, we have to remind ourselves why we're doing this. So we got through the end of the tour. We did our hometown tour, our homecoming show. And then I think we took a couple of weeks off, like late December, early January. And then when we came back, we're like, okay, we need to talk about like how we fix this, because we need to, like, yes, we need to work, but it shouldn't be, we need to enjoy this. And
yeah, that's fair.
You know, that's when I was going through my therapy. And there was a time where like, there was a lot that I talked about there. Like, Yeah, December could have been very, very different if I could go back and change a lot of things there. But I think that's one of the reasons that like we get along so well. And I think why we are so close. That like there's a lot of understanding in mental illness and kind of the things that we go through, and we're there to have each other's back. And I think when we sat down in January, like we did pull out a calendar and we're like, okay, let's map out the tentative year, just so that like we don't end up the way we did at the end of last year, because that was, the result was fine. Yeah. I mean, when you're finally playing a show, like when we finally had our homecoming show and we were playing in front of friends and family, like, and they were our songs for the very first time. Like that was one of the most rewarding things. But, a week of just like hating it leading into like that 1 hour.
Yeah.
That's what it was. There was a week of just like, are we even going to make it to that show?
It's always like nice to find someone that you kind of coexist with. Like you don't always have to agree, but just come to terms with how things work. But yeah, I'm sure there was plenty of times in like group projects in like high school or university, maybe you guys can relate, where you're like, why am I carrying the whole goddamn team?
Well, and I always hated group projects, so I think that's probably part of why I was so freaked out about.
People probably hated me in school for that, where it's like we're working on a group project, and I'm like, I'll join your group, but I don't really want to join your group, and they're like, well, we don't want you. I'm like, thank God. I'm like, I was too honest, and they're just like, well, no, we don't like you anyway. I'm like, that's fair. I'm like, good, because I would rather fail by myself than a teacher be like, actually, you failed collectively. I'm like, no, we didn't. We did not fail collectively. Keith over there failed. I did my part.
I need to know who this Keith is in your life, because you've talked about them multiple times on this show.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just protecting people's names at this point. It'd be funny if there was like an actual guy that like I went to school with and his name was Keith, and he's like, Brian, I thought we were friends. I'm like, I don't even know who the fuck you are, Keith. And then he'd be like, but I just subscribed to your podcast. I'd be like, that's great, Keith. Just remember, like, like it and share it as well.
No, you need to bring Keith on as a guest at that point.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So I know we talk about Keith a lot.
So my little sister was really into YouTubers. That was a big thing when she was growing up.
Yeah.
19 now. And it was a huge thing with her growing up. And she used to love this kid. I don't know. He was like 18 or something. He used to come on and read his like childhood journal, just like read his diary, like on little YouTube clips, which I thought was so brilliant. And it's so funny. But I have to be like, because he just says the names of these people. And I'm like, imagine these poor people he went to school with.
There's a part of me that thinks that that's clever, because I feel like he's smart enough not to use their names. Like I have one now. It's similar to what like you were saying. I think he's like, he draws sketches. I think it's called like brewstew.com, and it's like a little bit more adult, and he curses in it. But like I'll watch them and I'm like, I really hope that the kid's name is not Patrick, because like every now and again he's like, yeah, Patrick's dad beat his ass, and he's like, screw you, Patrick. And I'm just like, I really hope that you are either very far away from Patrick, or Patrick does not know you have a YouTube channel. Or in most cases, the guy's name is not Patrick at all. He knows he's talking about him, but he's like, I can't do goddamn shit because it's not my name. It's like someone coming on to more and saying all the shit in the world about this podcast, but they don't refer to it as Tobin Tonight. But they're talking about you, and you're like, I really can't do anything because technically he didn't say my name, and people probably know who it is, but who knows? It's like me going on to more and be like, yeah, so one of our recent interviews, we really talked about like breakup songs and these people were on and blah, blah, blah. And then you were like, sounds like us.
Yeah.
We can't really call him out on it because it's not him saying it's us.
Yeah.
That's how people get away with things. I want to ask you a very kind of self-inflicting question here, but like, we're talking about missing things. We're talking about the single. Like, what did you miss about me?
Oh, I mean, luckily for us, you dip into our DMs. You slide in our DMs a lot.
You're making it sound horrible already. No.
90s talk always, but also the Herbert accent, the Herbert voice.
That's nice.
We're both huge Family Guy fans. You more than me.
Yeah. love my Family Guy, so that's my favorite. I've met with friends and like that you have come up, and I've literally gone back for a message and be like, you have to listen to this, listen to him do the voice.
That's nice. I like that. I feel like if there's a time when I'm in Toronto or something, I'm like, oh, my knee. Someone be like, why does that sound familiar? Do you know Nicole? And I'd be like, yes, I know Nicole. And they'd be like, is there an old guy trapped inside of you? I'd be like, you don't want to meet Sully. Like, Armand, like, what did you miss about me?
I think the last hour and 42 minutes are like honestly a really good example of that. We've been talking for this long, and it's honestly just felt like I can't believe it's been this long. Because I don't know, we've been shooting the shit, and I think that's one of the. I'll honestly say that like we keep a lot of, I think, what happens between us behind closed doors. Obviously, like we have an image on social and everything like that we like keeping up. And this is the first time where like, I don't know, either of us, well, I guess mostly me, but well, you didn't give me a look of like, shut the fuck up, talk about this. But this is the first time that we've actually been open about just the challenges that we had in December. And the fact that like, you know, there was a point where I think we both actually went like, I don't even think the show we're going to make it to this show.
Yeah.
And I think being able to comfortably talk about that and not even have you bring it up is a really cool example of why we love sitting and having these chats with you. You know, you're a really great person to talk to, and you're like our therapist really at this point. Like
I feel like there's going to be a day where it's like I'm going to be dead and someone's just like, well, who was his therapist? It's like he didn't really have a therapist, but he took a lot of shit in, and then they'd be like, oh, is that why the bathroom is still unflushed? I'm like, no, literally, Keith, come on, this is horrible. He's dead. It's like, yeah, but he was such a monster to me. I feel like I can get one last dig at him. I'm like, seriously, he's getting buried tomorrow, and you made a digging joke? Like, come on, Keith.
I think all in all, like, you know, not just on the comfort side, not just that, you know, everything's very laid back, but you also take the time to do your research ahead of time. We appreciate that.
Yeah, it's fair. I feel like, listen, look, what's the research? There's like a blank, it's a blank sheet of paper. I feel like it's just more or less a memory of like, all right, let's remember key concepts that I think are genuinely interesting and then go from there. Now, listen, if it was someone like, I don't know, Halsey, maybe this sheet would have a few notes, but like someone's like, you literally have 3 things written down for Halsey. I'd be like, yeah, and like, I know where I'm going with this interview with Halsey. And they'd be like, all right, good luck. And then I'll finish the interview. I'm like, I could have did more. But at the same point, I'm like, whatever.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to Broadtree for coming on to the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thank you for listening, and good night.